Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film Speak No Evil, directed by James Watkins. So this is a psychological thriller that I actually found really thrilling. It's scary, it's tense, it's squirmingly uncomfortable at times. It's anxiety inducing even before the tension starts. I found out afterwards that it's actually a remake of a 2022 Danish film of the same name, directed by Christian Tafdrup. I read that the Danish version was a little bit darker and more disturbing. I had to watch it, so I've seen them both over the course of 2 days. I'll make some comment about the 2022 version at the end. There are lots of similarities and some big differences. I won't give any spoilers through most of this review, including when I talk about the Danish version later. However, at the very end, I have to talk about the end of both films. So I will alert you if I'm going to go into spoiler territory. So in the remake, an American couple and a British couple meet on holiday in Italy. And it's one of those situations where someone is being really nice, really friendly, almost too gracious, so much that it actually makes you uncomfortable. But it's not constant, it's coming and going all the time. 1 minute the conversation is really awkward and uncomfortable. In the next minute, everything relaxes and it seems okay for a short while. I don't want to say that this film has humour in it as such. It's certainly not laugh out loud, but it is quite funny seeing how polite people are with each other in the face of this awkwardness, how dishonest we all can get when we don't want to offend others, but we know that something isn't quite right. The British couple invite the American couple to their farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in the West Country of the UK. And again, we have these two people being super nice, super gracious to their guests, but somehow everything is just so awkward. I'm not going to give too much away because part of the joy of this film is the toing and froing in terms of the story. This film never really lets you settle, but the pacing is brilliant. Nothing's done too fast. The story evolves slowly and excruciatingly, but always kept me gripped. James McAvoy is brilliant. In fact, all of the actors are, but he's the linchpin that really makes it. The others feed off him. The film explores parental instincts in times of crisis situations. I thought this was really interesting. And who comes out the strongest in terms of the American father and mother? In terms of this theme, it made me think a bit of Force Majeure by Ruben Östlund, although they are very different films. At one level, this film is terrifying. It includes all of the tropes you'd expect in a psychological thriller, but it's never cliched or melodramatic. I talked about the humour before. As the situation evolves and becomes more serious, I actually found myself laughing at the sheer enjoyment of these moments. This film isn't a work of art, but it's having a ball creating a gripping thriller with style. I recently reviewed Blink Twice, another psychological thriller, which is still being screened, so it must have done quite well. I know a few people who really enjoyed this film. I thought it was terrible in terms of script, story, tension, lack of engagement with the characters. For me, Speak No Evil gets all of this right in the way that Blink Twice doesn't. So let's talk about the Danish version from 2022. I read that it was more disturbing than this remake, and some people have suggested that this version's been softened in order to have wider appeal. No spoilers yet, but I'll give warning in a minute. The first thing to say is that so much of the two films is exactly the same script, very similar scenes, but there are small differences and some big differences. I really enjoyed this. It could be boring, I guess, to see basically the same film twice, but I thought it worked really well. These films are very similar, but they're different enough to both be really enjoyable. If you haven't seen either of them and you plan to watch both, I would watch them in the order that I did, the remake first and then the original 2022 version. But to be honest, it probably would work the other way round too. I felt I understood more about the themes of the film after watching the second. I don't know if it's because it addresses them more directly or whether this would have happened if I watched the remake again. But I think that both these films are a dark view of the world, that we live with a complacency that everything works in the way that it appears to. But then, when it doesn't, our pampered lifestyles leave us unprepared to deal with the brutal reality of the real world. It's a dark message, a pretty scary message. The mother reverts to basic survival instincts, but the father struggles to cope. It's like he's impotent when it comes to the reality of the world. Between the two films, they really have made me think. Both these films are everything that a highly entertaining psychological thriller should be, and I highly recommend them both. If you only want to watch one, the Danish one is more disturbing. That's as much as I'll say without giving any spoilers. So that could help you decide which one is for you. Actually, one other thing that I didn't say is that McAvoy probably just about pips the actor playing the same role in the original. They're both really good, but there's something about McAvoy's performance that just stands out for me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the endings now. Spoiler alert. I'm not actually going to say what happens in each film, but I do want to make a comment comparing the endings. Wow, both of these films have really satisfying endings, but they're so different. The original Danish version is very similar to the remake in terms of being a psychological thriller for most of the film, but the last 10 minutes of the Danish version turn into a very disturbing horror film. I'm squeamish and don't like horror generally. I could cope with it. It didn't feel gratuitous, but boy is it horrific. It's almost the worst ending that you could imagine. It really hammers home this point about the complacency I mentioned. The remake is a happy ending compared to the original. Of course, I was totally involved in the remake, and so I was glad that they won at the end. It's a great ending, I thought, but the Danish one is much more courageous as an ending. It gives you no relief. The tension builds up, and then the worst thing imaginable happens. I do think that the remake is perhaps sanitised in order to do well at the cinema. I think the end of the original is probably too much for a mainstream blockbuster. In the end, I actually think that the films work really well together. So as I've already said, I highly recommend them both. Just be ready to watch through gaps in your fingers in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the original if you're sensitive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.